Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. All about nutrition from your favorite dietitian. Everything you need to digest in your mind. Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. Making you healthier one bite at a time. With Tony. Woo.
Hello and welcome to the Tips with Tony podcast. I'm Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time. This episode is going to be all about how you can assess your progress if you struggle with binge eating. So very often, those who struggle with binge eating often get caught up in feeling like it's either all or nothing. So it's the all or nothing mindset is what gets them in trouble and which leads to binging in the first place, but then kind of beating themselves up about doing it again. And because they binged again, now they feel like they're a failure, and so they may as well just keep going. And so we're going to talk more and more about how it's important to note that just like any goal that you have for yourself or any process, any progress that you're trying to make in your health and wellness journey, there's steps, and you're never going to be able to have it all figured out right away. It takes a lot of trial and error. It takes a lot of celebrating the small wins. It takes a lot of patience. And I want to kind of teach you how to manage your progress when it comes to binging. So first things first, we need to identify what binge eating disorder is. And so you can struggle with binging without being classified with having a binge eating disorder. However, you could also struggle with binge eating disorder and maybe you've been diagnosed. So there are specific criteria when it comes to diagnosing binge eating disorder. So it's usually if you eat large amounts of food when you're not physically hungry, that could potentially mean that you have binge eating disorder. But it's not just that alone. So eating large amounts of food when not physically hungry, I can say many of us have probably done that before. So it's that, but plus eating more than you would in a discrete period of time. So also like almost doing it, really, really quickly or over a long period of time. So it's eating large amounts of food when not physically hungry, plus eating more than you would in a discrete period of time, and then plus 3 or more of these things. This is how we know it's become someone who's not just an overeater, but where it's really a problem. It almost feels like it's compulsive and there's lack of control. So eating large amounts of food when not physically hungry, plus eating more than would in a discrete period of time, plus 3 or more of the following: eating rapidly, a sense of lack of control over eating, eating until uncomfortably full, feeling disgusted, depressed, or very guilty after eating, and eating alone because embarrassment of overeating. So you can, if you have 3 or more of those, anything that I just described, then there's a possibility that you could be diagnosed with binge eating disorder. Now, this podcast is not out there to have you be diagnosing yourselves, but if anything that I just said sounded pretty alarming to you, I would strongly encourage you getting help. I just did a podcast episode about why it's important to get a therapist. There are eating disorder specialists out there, but in general, if you need to work with a dietitian, a lot of my clients I work with have struggled with binge eating disorder. You definitely want to work with a nutrition professional with a credible degree, okay? So this is really, really important. If you really are struggling with binge eating disorder, this is something that you've struggled with most of your life, or maybe it's new for you, and you're recognizing that it's a serious problem, you don't want to just go to Google and just try to fix your problems that way. I'm going to do another episode about the difference between binge eating disorder and disordered eating, but the point being that many people think that they can find their solutions on the internet, but that's not the case. If anything, it's just going to make those situations worse. You need a professional to help you through the mindset, to help you through, what you're eating, why you're eating it, bringing you aware to your choices and helping you to keeping you accountable. So there's a lot of benefits to seeking a nutrition professional or a mental health professional if you struggle with binge eating disorder or even disordered eating. So with that being said, one thing that I really try to teach my clients are the many ways in which you can monitor your progress with binging, because what often happens with people who struggle with binging is that all or nothing mindset. It's like, I ate a couple cookies, I may as well eat the whole box, right? I ate the whole box of cookies, I may as well also go for the ice cream. Well, I already had that. You know what? I may as well just finish eating all of this food and start again tomorrow. And then they go to restrict, and then they have the same problem again at night because they didn't eat all day. So it's just playing into those hunger cycles. They're completely off skewed. One other thing about binge eating disorder that I didn't mention is usually not actually being aware of your hunger cues. That's pretty common as well. But with that being said, whenever you're trying to change something, it takes time and patience and self-awareness, and it's not going to happen overnight. So to think that you're never going to binge again, it's very similar to what I teach people with emotional eating. You're never not going to eat emotionally again. You're just going to be mindful of it, and you're going to learn how to manage it better. So with binging, the goal is to do it less frequently, and I'll also talk about the other types of progress. But the point being is that maybe you don't ever do it again, but you're always going to want to do it again. So maybe I should clarify that. It's kind of like an alcoholic, not the same, but similar, who, once they learn the skills, they could potentially be alcohol-free the rest of their life, but it's not always easy for them. It might get easier, but they're still always going to kind of have to manage it and keep it in check. So I hope that makes sense. So I want to just talk about the 5 different types of progress with binging. So that way you can always look for ways to know that you're making progress outside of what you think is appropriate, which is using your quote-unquote willpower. That is not going to work for you. And I'll explain to you. I think I've mentioned it before in other podcasts. Like we don't have willpower. That is a lie. We are animals, and when we're hungry, we want to eat. And so there's no such thing as willpower, really. Maybe sometimes, but I wouldn't depend on your willpower to create change. I would depend on forming healthy habits, because healthier habits is, believe it or not, easier. It's the path of least resistance, which humans are we're wired to choose. So that's, sometimes I go off on a tangent. Anyways, so 5 types of progress with binging. So the first one is frequency. So how often? So very often when I work with my clients who struggle with binging, they'll tell me that, it's pretty frequent that it might go on like almost every weekend, or, 2 to 3 times a week, or for like weeks on end, and then they'll stop, and then it'll go on for another weeks on end. So the frequency is the first thing that we're trying to manage. So when they are, when we begin working together, because of the accountability and the skills and the knowledge that I provide for them, they're often noticing that they actually, a lot of my clients that I have on board, it's like it'll take them a month to really go on a binge. And then when they do, they notice that there's even progress in all the other areas. So frequency is one way to measure progress. So if you used to binge, say, 2 to 3 times out of the week, and now you're only doing it once a week or once every other week, that's progress and definitely something to celebrate. Another thing that really happens very often with my clients, which I'm really proud of them for, is the duration is actually shorter. So the binges, so they used to do it 2 to 3 times a week, and it would be for like 3 or 4 hours. But now they're actually catching themselves in the middle and actually deciding, you know what, I'm gonna stop, and I'm not gonna let this go on for another few hours. Like I'm just gonna go to sleep, and I'm just gonna brush my teeth, and I'm just gonna go to bed. And they catch it in the middle, so they actually decrease they shorten the duration and how long in which they binge. So that's really, really hopeful. The other thing that they could do is, actually making better food choices. Because it implies control. So there's a difference between, binging on, ice cream and cookies and, syrup, and then going for the chips and all of that stuff, versus choosing, you're just going to have, like, even though you're not hungry, maybe, but you just feel like binging because whatever behavior it's making you do that. You're choosing something like popcorn, and maybe you do a healthier ice cream, maybe one that's, like a halo top or something like that. And, so the act of eating when you're not physically hungry and still overeating, that still counts as binging. But the fact that you've decided to choose something that doesn't make you feel, that isn't so, calorie dense, or at least makes you feel like you're making somewhat of a better choice, that's progress. That's something that you definitely want to pay attention to. And kind of going off of that also too, just decreasing the volume consumed. So maybe previously when you would binge, you would eat past way past the point of fullness, to the point where like food didn't even taste good anymore. You just felt completely numb. You noticed your stomach, you needed to like unbuckle your pants, but you just kept going. That is, that's a lot of volume. But maybe this time now when you binge, even though you're eating past fullness and you're eating when you're not hungry, you actually aren't getting to that place where it's so uncomfortable, where you feel like you either need to like unbuckle your pants or just go to sleep, or hopefully you don't do anything like purge or exercise or whatever it would be to remove that. So that leaves me to the last part. So the last way to track your progress when it comes to binging is that rebounding process. So very often after a binge, people will restrict, or they'll do something to get it out. So it'll be exercise or purging, or not eating anything for the following day, and really restricting. Another thing that might often happens as a result of that is shame and guilt and beating themselves up about it, and just, being really, really mean to themselves in their head. So one way to manage progress is to note that, like, okay, so now you realize, okay, I just did that. I just ate that. I just binged. I just overdid it. I ate when I wasn't hungry, but you know what? I am not going to restrict tomorrow. I'm going to just pretend like I know, because if I restrict tomorrow, I know I'll probably do it again. So I'm just going to pretend like, almost like, you know what? I don't even feel bad that it happened, because I'm using this as an opportunity to make myself better. And tomorrow I'm going to eat a balanced breakfast, and I'm going to make sure that I, drink a lot of water throughout the day, have snacks in between, and I choose really healthy, nutrient-dense choices, so that way I can feel like confident in at least, not doing this again tomorrow. So the rebounding process is very often probably the most important of the progress types, because that's really where it plays into the mindset, and that's what's really going to kind of help really dictate how frequently you binge, or the duration, or the volume, or the choices you choose. So that rebounding process is the thing that I want you guys to focus on the most. Although they're all important, being able to kind of just being compassionate with yourself, forgiving with yourself, not beating yourself up about doing it, and then choosing to make choices that are going to support your goals of decreasing how often or how much you binge is actually going to be the way in which you're going to be able to look back, 6 months from now and be like, wow, in 6 months, I used to binge every weekend. And I used to it was like this vicious cycle of I'll start again on Monday. And then now, honestly, like I've consistently ate well and I've ate balanced, and it's been 6 months. And yeah, maybe I had a couple weekends where I overdid it a little bit, but I caught myself, pulled myself out, and have been really, really proud of myself for not doing that again. So that is the ultimate goal, guys. And I want you to really kind of find ways to feel good about yourself. And so I hope those 5 types of progress, hope you recognize that there are many ways to kind of celebrate your wins, measure your progress. And I hope you know that you're not supposed to be perfect. That perfectionist mindset is what screws so many of us up. And it's probably why you're staying stuck in the cycle. So with that being said, if you want additional support, guidance, you have questions, if you find that this would be helpful, maybe, you don't personally struggle with binge eating disorder, but you know someone who does, or maybe, it doesn't even have to be binge eating disorder. It could just be someone who you feel like, or you personally, you just feel like, you're eating in secret, you're overeating past the point of fullness. You just don't feel like you have handle or control of your eating habits, or you feel guilty with eating. These are all reasons to get support. So like I said, if anything I've said to you resonated with you, if you're looking for additional guidance, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. You could always email me, tipswithtony@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this episode, like I said, share it on your story or share it with someone you think would benefit. As always, I just want to say thank you so much for listening to the Tips with Tony podcast. I'm Tony Marinici, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time.